Right, because silence has weight. Not the peaceful kind, not the quiet that hums like dusk before sleep, but the kind that presses inward, folding my lungs, bending my spine, reminding me that something inside me wants to be seen and has nowhere to go. I learned early that my voice was dangerous. Words spoken aloud carried consequences, judgments, misunderstandings, and permanence. Once released, they could not be retrieved, reshaped, or softened. They stood there, raw and exposed, waiting to be dissected by ears that never truly listened. Writing, however, was different. Writing allowed me to breathe without fear. Writing let my hand speak what my mouth refused to risk. I never meant to become this person, the one who hides behind sentences, who pours emotion into paragraphs instead of conversations. It happened slowly, quietly, like rust forming on metal left in the rain. Each time I swallowed a truth, each time I smiled when something inside cracked, the distance between my spoken self and my real self grew wider. Eventually, the gap became unbridgeable. I wore politeness like armor. I wore humor like camouflage. I wore strength because weakness was never welcomed. People praised the mask so often that I began to wonder whether the mask had replaced me entirely. This is not a story about tragedy in the dramatic sense. No singular catastrophe defines it. There are no loud explosions, no grand betrayals that make for easy explanations. This is a story about accumulation, about the small moments that pile up until they become unbearable, about being told repeatedly and subtly that your feelings are inconvenient, your reactions excessive, your pain unjustified, about learning to minimize yourself so others feel comfortable standing near you, about becoming fluent in survival while forgetting the language of honesty. I write because writing forgives me. The page does not interrupt. It does not rush me toward a conclusion or demand that I justify my sadness with comparisons. It does not say others have it worse, as if pain were a competition with a prize for endurance. When I write, I am allowed to exist exactly as I am, without apology. I am allowed to contradict myself, to be uncertain, to change my mind mid-sentence. I am allowed to feel deeply without being accused of weakness. The page holds my truth without asking me to dilute it. There is guilt tangled into this relief, though. Guilt for speaking when others are silent. Guilt for hurting when others suffer more visibly. Guilt for wanting comfort when the world seems to demand resilience. I tell myself I should be grateful, that things could be worse, that perspective should erase pain. Yet perspective never heals a wound, it only teaches you to hide it better. I know there are people enduring far heavier burdens than mine, but that knowledge does not unbreak what has cracked inside me. Pain does not vanish because it is outmatched. Perhaps this is the first lesson I am still learning. Suffering is not invalidated by comparison. Somewhere, someone stronger than me is breaking quietly. Somewhere, someone happier than me is still lonely. Somewhere, someone admired is still begging internally to be seen. Knowing this does not lessen my pain, but it reframes it. It reminds me that I am not defective for feeling this way. I am human, responding to human circumstances with human emotion. Home is a word I struggle to define. It should be simple, but it never has been. Home is supposed to be where the heart rests, where the body unclenches, where the soul does not need permission to exist. For me, home has often been conditional, a place where love is present but understanding is limited, a place where expectations loom heavier than comfort. I learned how to belong without being fully known. I learned how to adapt without asking whether adaptation was costing me myself. People think writers exaggerate. They imagine we dress our feelings in drama, embellishing the mundane for effect. I wish that were true. I wish these words were crafted performances rather than confessions. I wish I could say this voice is fictional, that it belongs to a character I invented. But the truth is less convenient. This voice is me, stripped of performance, speaking from beneath the layers of politeness and restraint. These sentences are not rehearsed, they are extracted. Love exists in this story, but not in the way people expect. It is not a sweeping romance or a perfect salvation. It is quieter, more complicated. It is the love of being held without explanation, the love of someone saying, "You don't need to prove anything here," the love of rest, the love of being believed. I crave a presence that does not ask me to translate my pain into something palatable. I crave a connection that allows silence without suspicion and honesty without punishment. I imagine someone reading these words one day, not to analyze them, not to fix me, but simply to understand. I imagine them pausing, feeling the weight between the lines, and responding not with advice, but with warmth. I imagine them telling me I was never wrong for feeling this deeply, that the loneliness I carry is not evidence of failure, but of sensitivity in a world that rewards numbness, that the mask I wore was not deception, but survival, and survival deserves compassion. Writing is the only place where I do not have to be brave. It is the only place where I am allowed to admit that I'm tired of holding myself together. Not broken, not beyond repair, but exhausted from constant vigilance, from monitoring my tone, my reactions, my needs, from deciding moment by moment what version of myself is safest to present. Here, on the page, I do not need to choose. I can be all of it at once. This is not a plea for rescue. It is not a demand for validation. It is an offering of truth, unpolished and sincere. I am not asking to be fixed. I am asking to be seen, to be recognized beneath the competence, beneath the smiles, beneath the carefully chosen words. I am still here, still breathing, still capable of love, still unfinished. If this story has a beginning, it is here, in the act of writing itself, in the decision to let the weight spill outward instead of inward, in the courage to admit that silence has been hurting me more than honesty ever could. I do not know how this story ends. I only know that for the first time in a long while, I am speaking in a way that does not require me to disappear.
Comes a moment, usually unannounced, when survival begins to feel heavier than surrender. Not surrender in the sense of giving up, but surrender in the sense of loosening your grip on the version of yourself that learned how to endure everything alone. I reached that moment quietly. No dramatic collapse, no visible breaking point, just a soft realization that I could not keep carrying myself like an unsolved equation, balanced carefully so nothing spilled, nothing revealed, nothing questioned. I began to notice how often I apologized for existing, for speaking too much or too little, for needing reassurance, for feeling deeply, for withdrawing when the noise became unbearable. I apologized even when no one accused me. The habit had etched itself into my nervous system. I had mistaken self-erasure for kindness, silence for maturity, endurance for strength. Somewhere along the way, I forgot that strength could also mean asking to be held. Love entered my life in fragments, not as a sudden miracle, but as small permissions. Someone listening without correcting me, someone staying when I expected them to leave, someone noticing the pauses between my words and respecting them. This kind of love did not demand performance. It did not reward perfection. It did not ask me to simplify my pain into something easily digestible. It simply existed, steady and patient, teaching me that connection does not have to hurt to be real. Yet even in love, fear lingered. Fear that if I showed too much, the fragile balance would shatter. Fear that honesty would be misunderstood, minimized, or used against me. I learned early that vulnerability could be weaponized, so I rationed my truth carefully, offering pieces instead of the whole. It took time to understand that real love does not keep score. It does not wait for you to fail. It does not disappear when you reveal your fractures. Healing, I discovered, is deeply inconvenient. It disrupts routines built around pain. It challenges identities shaped by endurance. It asks you to confront grief you postponed in the name of survival. Healing requires presence, and presence is terrifying when you have learned to live in anticipation of loss. Letting go of constant vigilance felt like stepping into open water without knowing how deep it was. I grieved the person I could have been if I had felt safe earlier. I grieved the years spent explaining myself to people who never intended to understand. I grieved the energy lost to self-monitoring, the nights spent rehearsing conversations that never happened, the mornings waking up already exhausted. Grief did not arrive all at once. It came in waves, unpredictable and relentless, demanding acknowledgement. There were days when writing felt insufficient, days when words circled the truth without landing, days when even the page felt distant. On those days, I reminded myself that healing is not linear, that progress does not mean constant clarity, that rest is not regression. I learned to sit with discomfort without rushing to resolve it, to let questions exist without immediate answers, to trust that not knowing does not mean failing. Home began to shift during this time. It stopped being a place tied to approval or expectation. It became a feeling I carried, fragile but growing. Home was where I could exhale without preparing for defense, where silence did not signal danger, where my presence was enough, even on days I had nothing impressive to offer. Home was no longer about being needed. It was about being welcomed. I started speaking more, slowly and imperfectly. My voice shook at first, unfamiliar with being heard. Words stumbled, sentences trailed off, but each attempt made the next one easier. I learned that spoken words are not always irreversible. Some can be met with gentleness, some can be corrected, some can be forgiven. I learned that being misunderstood is survivable, that discomfort does not equal catastrophe. The mask did not disappear overnight. It loosened gradually, slipping when I felt safe, tightening when fear resurfaced. I stopped hating it. I understood that it once protected me, that it formed in response to real experiences. I thanked it silently and allowed myself to set it down when I no longer needed its weight. Growth, I realized, does not require rejection of your past selves. It requires integration. Love deepened in unexpected ways, not through grand gestures, but through consistency, through showing up after difficult conversations, through choosing patience over assumption, through staying present when old wounds surfaced. Love became less about intensity and more about reliability, less about rescue and more about companionship. I learned that being loved does not mean being completed, it means being accompanied. There were setbacks, moments when loneliness returned, sharp and convincing, moments when old narratives resurfaced, whispering that I was too much, too sensitive, too complicated. In those moments, I returned to writing, not to escape, but to anchor, to remind myself of how far I had come, to document truth when doubt grew loud. Writing became both witness and companion. I no longer write solely to survive. I write to remember, to honor the versions of myself that endured without recognition, to celebrate the quiet victories that no one else sees, to articulate boundaries I once lacked the language for. Writing has become less of a hiding place and more of a homecoming. If someone reads this now, I hope they do not see despair. I hope they recognize courage unfolding slowly. I hope they recognize the bravery in choosing softness after hardness, honesty after silence, connection after isolation.
I hope they understand that healing does not erase pain. It transforms its role in your life. Pain becomes information, not identity. I am still unfinished. I still have days when fear speaks louder than trust, but I am learning to listen differently. I am learning to respond with compassion instead of control. I am learning that my worth is not measured by how little space I take up, but by how truthfully I occupy it. This story does not end with certainty. It ends with intention. The intention to keep choosing presence, to keep allowing love even when it feels risky, to keep speaking even when my voice trembles, to keep writing not because I am broken, but because I am alive and paying attention. I once believed that silence was safer than truth. Now I know that silence almost erased me. Writing gave me language, love gave me courage, and healing, slow and imperfect, gave me back to myself.